get started. Thank you for coming. My name is Landon Blake, and I'm a land surveyor. I work in Stockton, California. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about survey control and some of the changes that are coming up, and what that means if you run or manage a GIS. And so we only have a handful. I thought maybe to get started, if you guys don't mind, we could do introductions. Would that be all right? Just so I know who I'm speaking to, maybe we can start here.
Chris Morris, I'm a public health researcher.
Okay.
And I'm really here.
Okay.
I'm Christian Rowan, I'm a consultant with URS.
With URS, okay.
I'm Alan Harvey. I'm doing a PhD in geography at the University of Chicago.
Okay. And maybe in the back. Okay.
My name is Cor Ballinger. I'm a recent graduate.
Okay.
Sarah Saget, I'm a researcher at Alstate Monterey.
Okay. And in the red.
Miguel Guerrero, GIS LiDAR analyst for datasets.
Okay. Deltech. And then I know Jeremy's our next speaker, but go ahead, Jeremy.
I'm Jeremy, I'm the next speaker. I happen to know probably less about mapping and GIS than everyone else in this room.
Okay. And then Brian, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Oh yeah, hi, I'm Brian, and I'm with the Open Source Geospatial Foundation, OSGeo, as is Landon.
And he's giving another talk a little later tonight. And I know we had a couple of people jump in. Okay, so I promised no high-level mathematics tonight, although we may do a little bit of geodesy. So, kind of a disclaimer before we start. Usually when I talk to audiences of surveyors, I'm usually telling them they need to not worry so much about always being so accurate, because what that does a lot of times to land surveyors is prices us out of the market. And so I'm often telling them, you don't always need survey-grade accuracy for a lot of GIS applications. So tonight I'm going to kind of flip that coin, and we're going to talk about GIS applications that do require a little more accuracy. And but I wanted to put that caveat out there. I'm not like some surveyors who think everything has to be positioned in the nearest time to put the foot. So I recognize there's times when that's not necessary. So let's talk about coordinates for a minute before we get into this next slide. And one thing that I learned at some point in my surveying career was that all coordinates are relative. And sometimes I think we forget that. And so let's think about latitude and longitude for a minute. And think about the difficulty of defining an absolute latitude-longitude grid on the surface of the Earth. And so think about our 0 point, our 0, 0 point for latitude and longitude. And that's some point on the Greenwich Meridian and the equator, right? And there's probably a monument there. And so we can define that as 0, 0. I don't know, it might be in the middle of the ocean. I'll have to look. He says yes. Okay, it's in the middle of the ocean. But here's the challenge. We define that one point, and we give it an absolute coordinate reference. And then we go a couple continents away, and we define another point. And we assign it a coordinate in that same system. And what's the challenge now when we come back 5, 10, 15, 20 years later? What's the challenge with those 2 points? What's happened to them at a survey grade level? Yeah, they moved. So they no longer have the same relationship. And so what you can begin to appreciate is that all coordinate systems we define are relative, right? Some position in relation to some other position. And so another example of that you may be familiar with because you live in the Bay, when surveyors come over to do geodetic surveying work in the Bay Area, if you cross the two sides of the San Andreas Fault, you're going to see change in monuments over time. And that's something that we can see in our measurements as surveyors, even in just a couple years in this area, we can see the difference. And so one of the questions that we often ask as surveyors is, when we're dealing with coordinates, the coordinates are important in relation to what? So for example, if I'm talking about coordinates on property corner monuments, I'm only worried about the relationship of those coordinates to other coordinates in what kind of range? Somebody take a stab at it. What kind of range do you think? How far am I worried about the relative coordinate? A mile, 10 miles, a block, 1,000 feet maybe, yeah. So it doesn't really matter, does it? I'm only really worried about those coordinates in relation to one another on a very local basis, right? And you start to do things like roads or sewer lines. Maybe now we're at a municipal level. I'm worried about things in relation to one another municipally, but you get much bigger than that, and it really becomes irrelevant at some point. Unless you're in a challenging area, for example, if you were building a new BART tunnel across the bottom of the bay, you're going to have issues there, right? Because of the plate movement on each side of the fault line. And so in some of those situations you have to think about it. But just remember, all coordinates are relative. If you want to think about it, the Earth spins on its axis and rotates around the sun, right? And the solar system rotates in the Milky Way galaxy, and even clusters of galaxies move within the universe. So all coordinates are extremely relative and depend on your particular purpose. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, since we're talking about coordinates, and you're going to see hopefully why this is important. We know that all coordinates are relative. So what we're going to talk about tonight is who is the NGS, what is survey control, why is survey control important. We're going to talk about two different types, passive and active survey control. We're going to talk about why are passive survey control monuments important, what's the future of survey control, and then finally kind of what are the impacts to that for the production of geospatial data. So that's kind of where we're going. So what is the NGS? Does anybody know what the NGS is in the room? Yes, go ahead. Take a stab at it.
Okay, National Geospatial.
Close to geodetic.
I'm thinking about the NGA maybe.
Yeah, this is the National Geodetic Survey. Okay, it's a federal agency. I think they're housed under NOAA. It's a group of very smart people, way smarter than me. And they have a single purpose in life. And their single purpose in life is to, and I pulled this right off their website, define, maintain, and provide access to the National Spatial Reference System. That's one of those definitions where you get the definition and you need another definition to understand. Right? So what is the National Spatial Reference System? Does anybody know?
National map.
It's kind of, could be related to the national map, yeah?
It's about to change.
It is about to change, yes.
That GIS, the lady was talking
Yes,
about.
it is about to change. So here's what it is. The North American plate is floating around on the surface of the Earth, right? In relation to all the other plates. And at some point, when we're dealing with mapping, national mapping efforts, do we really care where the United States is in relation to Europe? At survey grade accuracy, do we care? No, we don't care, right? As long as you can fly a plane from London to New York, we don't care, right? So what the NGS does, in essence, is they say, we are going to define a fixed reference frame on the United States. And we don't care how that moves in relation to the rest of the Earth or the universe. It's just going to be used for mapping efforts in the continental United States, in Alaska, Puerto Rico, and those other places. And we want to give surveyors a common reference frame that they can work from while they're in the United States. And so that's the whole job of the NGS. Now, why is it important for surveyors to have that common reference frame? Does anybody know? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Well, it's data infrastructure. It's a foundation. It's
Okay.
Like a
Yes, the foundation, sure. Does anybody in the talk from the guy from Marin County who's talking about base maps? A couple guys were. Remember he said the challenge they had when they started to lay over the data, what did they find? The data didn't fit, right?
Okay. Because sometimes some agencies will map in a way that's convenient to their purpose, and not literally exactly, and then you get a couple of those variations and suddenly things start to happen.
Yeah. We're going to go a little deep, so bear with me. I'll try not to lose you. So a lot of times, there's different reasons why data doesn't fit together, right? The data wasn't collected at sufficient accuracy, it's not at a small enough scale. But one of the problems we have, like if you're working in your desktop GIS and you drop in layer A and then you drop in layer B and they're completely different places, what's the first thing you think? What's the problem?
Wrong projection.
Wrong projection, yeah, it's a wrong projection. So that's what you look at. So here's the problem that surveyors deal with. So from a GIS analyst perspective, if it's in California State Plane or UTM, if layer A is in UTM and layer B is in UTM, and they're in the same zone, that should be good enough, right? They should land on top of each other. But here's what happens when you're a surveyor. You've got California State Plane coordinates for layer A, and you got California State Plane coordinates for layer B, but for surveyors, we can measure closely enough to understand that there's a difference between those two sets of coordinates, okay? that depends on some different factors, and we're going to get into that in a couple more slides. So here's the key. What NGS does, in part, is it tries to eliminate that problem. So it wants to provide a reference frame across the nation so that when surveyor A goes out and he's followed by surveyor B, and you ask them both where the lid of the manhole is, in essence you get the same answer, right? That's kind of the purpose of the NGS. In fact, NGS, I don't know how many people know this, but NGS is the agency that defines the state point coordinate systems that a lot of us use, okay? All right, and NGS is important because their role is changing, and we're going to talk about that as we move on a little bit into the presentation. Okay, so what is survey control? So survey control provides surveyors with the physical realization of a common reference frame. And so let's think about this for a minute. And I'm going to take a GPS as an example, because a lot of GIS people are familiar with that. So you whip out your GPS receiver. But let's say it's survey grade, and you can get a couple hundreds precision out of this receiver. And you go out and you set it up on a point, and you take an observation, a measurement, and it gives you a latitude, longitude position, WGS 84. Okay? How does the receiver know where it's at? How does it know what's the basis of that coordinate?
Just triangulating between satellites.
Okay, now that's excellent, and I knew I was going to get that answer, and you're right. That's the correct answer, but I'm gonna take you. Now that's where most people stop, right? I got the coordinate on my point. It comes from the satellite. Measurements to the satellites. That's all I need to know. But now I'm going to take you a step farther to illustrate a point. How do they know where the coordinates are on the satellites? Because you got to know where the satellites are to get a coordinate on the point that you've measured. So how do they know where the coordinates are on the satellites? Anybody know?
Aren't they? They're in geosynchronous orbits, and they time them.
That's
So-
true. They track them.
When it comes around at a certain time, it clicks on the point,
Sure.
and then they triangulate with different points.
Oh,
Laying back.
yeah. They triangulate with different points.
They like
Okay.
four. They like
Okay.
four is the magic number of a satellite, right?
So here's the key. This is the concept I want you guys to understand. Ultimately, even though those coordinates come from satellites in the sky, the coordinates on the satellite come from reference marks on the ground, physical marks. Yeah, the little brass round things. Yeah. Does anybody know who maintains the little brass round things that give the satellites their coordinates?
No.
No one?
No.
Gnomes? Yeah. Yes, that's what my wife would say. She would say that. By the way, I'm taping this talk, so don't say anything bad about your wife or your boss. Okay? Because it'll show up on YouTube. It's the Department of Defense that does that. Okay? Now, I've never seen one of the marks, but somewhere somebody came along and said, all right, this station has coordinate A, B, C, and we're going to measure from it and these other set of points to the satellites to determine the position of the satellite. Okay. Top of every peak? Yeah. Okay, so the reason I led us down that GPS discussion is because here's what I want everybody to understand. When the rubber meets the road, what we care about is some physical mark. You can define a coordinate system without physical marks, but it's kind of like an abstract concept that doesn't do any good, right? The only way a coordinate system definition does any good is if it's tied to the surface of the Earth. And how do we tie coordinate systems to the surface of the Earth? What do we use? The little brass round things. Yeah, surveyors call them monuments. Okay, so that's a key concept. Now, here's what's kind of messed with our world a little bit. They came out with something new now, and NGS has decided they don't need physical monuments anymore. And what they came out with is the most common implementation of it is CORS. Anybody know what CORS is? You guys know what CORS is, right? Continually Operated Reference Station. So that's a GPS receiver that they set up over a point, and it runs 24/7. Okay. And what that allows a surveyor to do is now I can go out with an instrument and set up on a point with no other equipment, and I can establish coordinates based on those other reference stations, highly precise work. Okay. So that's gonna take us into. So there's two types of control. I lost my outline here.
But it's still something at that spot instead of a brass dot at the little machine.
That's it. Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. So the physical mark has become a receiver antenna in essence. Yeah.
Now, I thought I heard someone give the talk where they said that the satellites actually aren't used for GPS location. They use cell phone towers or something. There's some other more local triangulation that they, in practice, they use now instead of the satellites.
I don't want to get too technical, but surveyors have some special ways of getting highly precise positioning from GPS, and we don't use the signal that everybody else uses. We actually use the carrier wave underneath, and it gets a little complicated. But so make a long story short, you've got these new type of control points which have an active receiver, okay, like cores, and then you have the old kind, which is the brass disc that's on top of the beacon. Okay? So here's what a surveyor has to do when he wants to define a coordinate system. So we need three things. So you need the definition of the coordinate system, the datum, the map projection, okay? California State Plane, Zone 3, NAD 83, NAVD 88, okay? Vertical datum, horizontal datum, projection, okay? And here's the other two things. Now, usually for GIS people, that's enough, but here's the other two things you need when you're a surveyor. You need some type of reference document that publishes coordinates on known points that you can reference to, okay? And that's usually some type of published survey. And so let me explain that a little bit because it gets a little confusing. NGS went through 1960, went all through California and established latitude, longitude positions highly accurate on monuments throughout the state. Okay? The city of Stockton needed a local control datum. So they went out, city of Stockton went out, and they picked the closest 5 monuments that surrounded the city, and they said, we're going to define our local city data based on these 5 points. Okay? And the city of Tracy did the same thing, or city of Lathrop. Okay? They chose their 5 closest monuments. Now, over time, because of subsidence and plate movement and other problems, what's happened to those 2 sets of monuments? Do they have the same relationship now that they had in 1960? And they have not. And so what you really end up with is, you end up with 3 flavors of the same coordinate reference system. You've got the city of Stockton flavor, you've got the city of Lathrop flavor, and then you have whatever NGS did in 1960. And guess what? When I go out to measure, depending on the reference document I use, I'm going to get 3 different coordinate solutions for the same mark, depending on which document I'm referencing. So it's a little difficult to understand, but I want you to, the concept is the same physical mark can have different coordinate values depending on the reference document that you're using. Are you using the datum, the local city datum? Are you using the county datum? Are you using East Bay MUD's datum? Okay, that's going to change. All right? So those are the 3 things that you need for survey grade accuracy. And if we got a little too technical there, don't feel bad. Things are going to get a little bit simpler. Okay, so why so we got the 2 kinds of monuments. We've got the active monument where the receiver's running. We have the passive monuments. And NGS has come out and told surveyors, we are no longer maintaining passive monuments. We're not going to update them. Not only that, but NGS is about to redefine both the horizontal and vertical datum for the United States sometime in the next 10 to 15 years. Okay? It's going to be completely redefined. And so the existing coordinates on all those monuments are going to essentially be no good for future work. Those monuments will no longer put you on the current national spatial reference frame, right? Which has important implications because sometimes I'm required by law to be on the national spatial reference frame. Okay? So those physical marks aren't going to do it. Now, the only way in the future to get on the national spatial reference frame that NGS has defined is through active control, cores. It's basically cores. And so let's think about this for a minute. How much does, just give me a ballpark, how much does a 4.5-inch brass disc cost? Anybody know, roughly? I'm going to take a stab at it. Yeah, you can buy them. I buy them all the time. They're about 30, 40, 20, 30 bucks, somewhere in there. Okay. Yeah, you drive them on a rebar, or you can set them in concrete. Okay. Now, what is a survey grade GPS receiver for a cores type of setup? What does that cost? Anybody know?
A lot more.
A lot more. Yeah. Who said that? Who said, oh yeah, yeah, thank you. A lot more. A good survey grade receiver can run about 30 grand.
And expenses.
It needs batteries, you gotta have a power connection, it could be solar, right?
Well,
You gotta have
somebody to maintain it.
Somebody's got to maintain it, you got to have some type of network connection to get the data from the receiver online. So there's all kinds of logistical problems. So what's the challenge now, and hopefully you guys are starting to understand the problem, what's the challenge when NGS says we're no longer maintaining passive monuments, we're only going to have active monuments? What's the problem, do you think?
It's probably going to be a lot fewer because it has.
Yeah, so did anybody, you guys watched the T-Mobile commercials with the girl on the rice rocket, right? Yeah, and so all those cell phone companies are selling us what as cell phone users? What are they trying to sell us? I have a better what than the next guy? Coverage, yeah, better coverage. So now you can imagine as we go from passive monuments to active monuments, which are exponentially more difficult to set up and maintain, what happens to our coverage in the United States? Survey control coverage.
It's going to be spotty.
It's going to be way worse. It's going to be way worse. Now, does anybody know why NGS has said they're no longer going to maintain physical marks, passive monuments? Anybody know why? Yes?
Maybe it's too hard to replace everything and change it, update it.
Okay, you're on the right line. Yeah. What's coming up in January if Congress doesn't get its act together? Does anybody know?
Fiscal cliff.
The fiscal cliff, yeah. So right now, everything in government boils down to what?
Money.
Money. Guess what? What does it take to maintain a massive network of passive monuments? Well, you got to update those regularly because we talked about they're moving, right? People bulldoze them, you know, things happen. So it costs a lot of money.
Not
Okay.
as much as buying and putting out a whole bunch.
Now, she's right. If you went and put in an active receiver, GPS or GNSS receiver on every one of those passive monuments, that would be like, I don't know, millions or billions of dollars, right? So is NGS going to do that? So they're basically telling the survey community you're going to get by with what? Well, not nothing, but less. Way less, right? And you may say, Landon, why do I care? As a GIS user, that's your problem. You shouldn't have been a surveyor. You should have been a GIS. Okay? That's true. It is my problem. So here's why it's important. So to talk about, I'm a couple slides behind now. So we talked about why passive monuments are important. We talked about the future. NGS isn't going to maintain them. So what are the impacts? So I'd like to know from this group, based on our conversation, and I know it was a little bit technical, but as this survey control network that the federal government defines becomes less dense and becomes, well, it's going to become way less dense. And it's going to be more difficult for me to get onto the National Spatial Reference Frame as a surveyor. What do you think the implications are of that for the larger geospatial community? Can you give me your name, please?
Court.
Cord?
Court.
Court.
Like tennis
Yeah.
court.
Okay, go ahead, Cord.
Yeah,
What
so
do you think?
that's, you would have less accuracy.
Okay, that's one thing. Yeah, so it's going to be more challenging to get survey data that lands right on top of each other, right? Okay. What else? What's another implication? Yeah.
The surveyor's hours and time is going to go way up
Yeah.
to be accurate, to cover themselves, to do all the above.
Yeah.
And so they're just going to divert true cost somewhere else.
Yeah. What was your name?
I'm like,
Mike. That was an excellent comment, Mike. So here's in essence what the federal government is doing. And I'm not saying this is good or bad, but I just want people to understand because I think it's important. The federal government has transferred the cost of maintaining a well-defined national spatial reference frame from the NGS to who? The private sector. And not just the private sector, but who else potentially? The public sector. If you're a local state, if you're a city or a state or a county that needs to maintain survey control, and most cities and counties do, what has NGS done with part of their bill to maintain the National Spatial Reference System? They've handed you a portion of that bill. Because here's what's going to happen now. When you're a city or a county or East Bay Mud, and you come to me and you say, Landon, we need really good survey-grade accurate coordinates on the National Spatial Reference Frame, and here's what we would like surveyed, and you're going to get my bill, and you're going to have a heart attack. Now listen, people have a heart attack when they see my bills anyways, but they're really going to have a heart attack now, because that control is going to be way more expensive. Now, if you're in the Bay Area, you probably don't have to worry about that as much because you guys have a lot of municipalities in a dense You know, there's a density of government agencies here. And so they're able to share costs, right? If you get over into some other parts of California, Central Valley, some of the desert, the mountains, and that's a huge, huge problem. And it's going to get worse. Now, let me tell you why crap hasn't hit the fan, so to speak. Is because right now, I can still use the passive monuments. But as soon as NGS redefines the datums, they're going to be a lot less useful. Who wants a survey grade data on an old datum? Raise your hand. Like nobody. No, they want. If you're going to pay for survey grade, you want it on the current datum, right? That's what everybody else is working on. Okay, that cost is about to get a lot more expensive in rural parts of the country. Okay. Now there's a couple things, a couple challenges. I've got about 3 minutes left. I don't want to run late. I'm kind of a hobby economist, and I've kind of come around the last couple of years to free market economics, right? Like, you don't want the government doing stuff that the private sector can do as a general rule.
So the private sector is a lot of times over the government doesn't have.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, what was your first name?
Lily.
Lily, that was a great comment, Lily. So here's the challenge. Surveyors don't like to talk to each other. You know, we just don't. We're kind of stubborn that way. And so somebody needs a control survey in San Joaquin County. And so they're going to hire my company, and we're going to go do a control survey. And then, you know, the next client down the road, the next city or utility, they're going to need a control survey. And they're going to hire Jeremy to do it. And he's going to go do it. And that's going to happen over and over and over again. So, in essence, what is the economic cost now of the federal government taking a step back from this role? If we're not careful, we're going to be paying a lot for the same surveys, right?
Probably the military is doing it on the side.
There's opportunity for all kinds of duplication here. So, what's the solution? The solution is we are going to need a coordinated effort at the local and state level, you know, city, county, state level, to avoid that duplication. And here's what you have to remember: it's cheaper for everybody that way, right? And as we move forward, and people want more accurate data sets, that survey foundation is going to become more and more important. And we need to coordinate that effort, because if every city and county and utility pays for that effort independently, it's going to get really expensive. And here's the kind of the close up and summary. I don't think there's very many people outside of NGS that have figured this out yet. And I don't even know that NGS has completely figured it out yet, because, you know, they're not the end user, they're the producer. And so this is something that people have to think about and that we have to coordinate. So, in summary, if you work for a public agency or a utility and you're not sure exactly what this talk meant, definitely get in touch with me. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there to coordinate efforts among the surveying community and save costs. Because you got to remember, the federal government is no longer doing the work. There is no money. And that burden is going to get shifted to the public and private sector at a smaller scale. So thank you for allowing me to bore you out of your mind. One final slide. If you're interested in these kind of issues, I'm launching a new magazine in January. It's kind of a plug. It's a GIS magazine for people with a surveying background. But we'll talk about issues like this. digitalsurveyingmap.com. You can hop on there right now. Shoot me an email, and we'll send you the first. It's a free magazine. Comes out in January. Okay.